the head of the studio at Warner Brothers, Peter Roth, I mean, he initially wanted to make Superboy.
This was before the Marvel Cinematic Universe, before Comic-Con was even the huge thing that it was. And Jeanette Kahn at DC Comics really gave us the license to go and make it our own.
20 years ago, the teenage Superman drama Smallville made its debut on the now-defunct WB network, launching a remarkable run that, despite its firm no tights, no flights edict, managed to fly further than any on-screen incarnation of the Man of Steel before or since. A 10-season run, in fact.
It is amazing how lasting the show has been, and it is surprising always that people still love it.
After all, those 217 episodes did much more than define the Superman mythos for an entire generation who grew up alongside Tom Welling's Clark Kent. Indeed, the show's reimagining of the classic superhero paradigm as a conflicted teen drama was a stroke of genius that not only gave renewed currency to the Superman legend, but also set the stage for an entire multiverse of live-action DC Comics shows that continue to spread across both network and streaming television to this day.
Kudos to Smallville. I think, it was the first of the many, and I'm very proud of it.
Why is it called Arrowverse?
Smallvilleverse.
Why is it Arrowverse?
Smallverse.
Warner Brothers? Where'd that come from?
Yes, without Smallville, there would likely be no Arrow, no Flash, no Superman and Lois, Titans, or Doom Patrol. So let's look back at the birth of Smallville 2 decades ago, how it managed to endure for 10 years, and the super legacy that the show left behind.
We didn't find him. He found us.
It all started with a proposed young Bruce Wayne series, but when the executives on the Warner Brothers feature film side decided that they didn't want any competition for the Batman reboot they were developing, young Bruce transformed into young Clark. Soon, the writing-producing team of Alfred Goh and Miles Millar were drafted by Warner Brothers Television's Peter Roth to work on the proposed series, which would eventually evolve into Smallville.
Superman has worked for every generation. You know what I mean? It was the 50s, he was the G-Man. In the 70s, it was Christopher Reeve. And then in the 90s, he was the yuppie with Lois and Clark. So, he's definitely a character who, changes with the times, but always remains basically who he is.
The writers knew that telling the story of Clark's youth was something that had never really been done properly in live action. And a big part of their approach would be the no tights, no flights mandate, which essentially meant young Clark wouldn't wear a costume and wouldn't fly, keeping him earthbound, both physically and in a more metaphorical sense as well. But a Superboy with no supersuit and stuck on the ground? At first, Warner Brothers didn't care for that idea much at all.
We were much more interested in finding the grounded version, the emotional version of this character, and really peeling back what made Superman, what made Clark Kent become Superman. Stripping away the suit really helped humanize him.
Of course, the biggest part of nailing this young Superman show would be in figuring out who would inhabit the role. The producers would strike gold, or is that gold kryptonite, when the relatively unknown model/actor Tom Welling entered the picture.
This headshot was in a pile, and David Nutter, the director of the pilot, saw it and wanted him to come in, and Tom didn't want to, because at that point there wasn't a script. So then once there was a script, he really loved it, and then he auditioned. And it's hard to say what it is. It's just, as you know it when you see it. But he felt like Clark Kent. He was also, frankly, not at that point, certainly not experienced, sort of from the Midwest, which actually kind of worked to his advantage.
The young cast of Smallville would prove to be another secret ingredient to the show's eventual success, a mix of fresh young faces that was balanced by more well-known actors playing the adult roles. But the linchpin of the show in the beginning was the trio of Welling's Clark, Kristen Kreuk's Lana Lang, and Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor.
We always thought we were going to cast Clark first and then cast around him. And then Kristen came to us from the casting directors in Vancouver, and we saw her videotape, and we were just like, that's Lana. And then when Tom, and she did a chemistry read together, it was just magic.
It was a lot of our first shows. I was looking at this moment in time and the show that I was doing with these people and trying to figure out what it meant to be on set and how to make a scene work.
I mean, I loved when there was episodes where we were combative, where just a glimpse of what the future holds for this super soon-to-be villain and this mild-mannered Clark Kent reporter.
I promise I'm not a criminal mastermind.
In an indication of just how much times have changed in the past 20 years, execs at the WB network were skeptical that a superhero show would even be able to find an audience when Smallville was about to launch.
The last iteration of Superman had been Lois and Clark. The last iteration of Batman had been Batman and Robin. There was no Marvel Cinematic Universe, and people were like, are you crazy? Like, why would you do that?
One can imagine the WB marketing department's eyes rolling back in their heads as they tried to puzzle through marketing a Superman show without the hero's name or his iconic suit and symbol. Although the first season's campaign did center on a shirtless Welling strung up in a cornfield with an S painted on his chest. Sure, it actually stood for Smallville in the context of the show, but it seemed to do the trick as far as luring in viewers.
What's funny is the year we premiered, we were like the only new pilot. Like, we were the only new show. Like, they had let go of Buffy, and all the chips were like pushed into the middle of the table.
Smallville also debuted just a month after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. The nation was reeling, but it seems that Smallville had suddenly become the type of show people were looking for after that tragic event.
And that's kind of really when the perception really switched. You know, went from this is going to be cheesy to, you know, America needs a hero. You know, it's Superman. He's the comfort food for the American soul.
That's the eternal attraction of Superman. That's why he appeals, I think. You know, it's the ultimate illegal immigrant who makes good and becomes the ultimate citizen. And it's somebody who's just a decent person. I think everyone aspires to be that.
The Clark Kent that we portrayed was very much of its time, a time that wanted goodness, that wanted to believe that people could be good. And I think it worked. And it wasn't that he was still struggling. He was going through difficulties, and he was grappling with what the right thing was, and yet still often chose at least what he thought was the right thing.
Ultimately, Superman, we think wholesome. We think someone who's good, who provides good escapism, where we can go in and like disappear for a minute and watch a show like Smallville and be entertained.
Indeed, Smallville was a smash hit right out of the gate, bringing in record ratings for the WB and eventually leading DC Comics to reconfigure Superman's comic book incarnation to more closely resemble his younger small-screen counterpart. For the creators and cast of the show, it was just now a matter of building out this corner of Clark's universe in a sustainable way.
So what are you, man or Superman?
As the show progressed, its approach to mapping out Clark's journey toward the red, blue, and yellow future we all knew awaited him provided a potent mix of the right ingredients at the right time that would keep Smallville plugging along through numerous cast changes and eventually even a network switch as the WB gave way to the CW.
Season 1 with Clark figuring out what his superpowers were, how to deal with them, what they meant, like how all of that stuff worked. I think that really encapsulated for me what Smallville was, which was a show about kind of growing up and about coming to understand who you are.
As you get into the show kind of evolves, and you suddenly find there's way more stories you can tell, and certain things, you know, you can push off, certain things you can bring up.
And characters you didn't expect to become important, and actors who start as guest stars ignite a fire in the writer's room, and you want to explore them further.
A particularly welcome guest star arrived in the Season 2 episode Rosetta, when Christopher Reeve himself returned to the Superman world for the first time in 16 years.
That season was sort of about the, you know, adopted kid looking for his birth parents. And, you know, we knew we had the episode where he was first going to hear about Krypton.
I think that episode is the perfect encapsulation of the show, because it's obviously Smallville, but you have the John Williams music, you have Christopher Reeve and Tom in the same scene, you have all this incredible mythology, and the chemistry between them is so real, and just to see Chris in that scene it's deeply moving.
The subject of legacy was very much laced into the show's DNA from its inception, both in terms of Clark discovering his and the show carrying forward Superman's. Reeve was just one of several classic Superman actors enlisted during Smallville's long run, including Terrence Stamp, Margot Kidder, Mark McClure, Dean Cain, Terry Hatcher, and more. Even non-Superman but still very nerd-friendly faces showed up, like Linda Carter and Carrie Fisher. But there was one powerful Jedi in particular who didn't quite make it to the small Kansas town.
We almost got Mark Hamill. We were like very close, and then it's like, oh, it's just like,
I'll never join you!
By seasons 3 and 4, the producers were confident enough in the world they had built that they began to delve into what they call the DC Toy Box. A younger Perry White showed up, Lois Lane was introduced, and future Justice League players would also pop into Smallville here and there.
Flash and all the, but we did it very sparingly. We really, made sure that it was part of Clark's evolution.
By season 6, Justin Hartley joined the show as Oliver Queen, aka the original CW Green Arrow, a DC superhero character who would eventually become a regular cast member.
This is a person who's also doing what Clark's doing, but has a different philosophy and a different, view of it. So, it starts to put his ideas, it starts to challenge them. We try to use it that way and not just as like throw more, costume people at it.
That character is near and dear to my heart. I think it's sort of one of the first characters that I played that put me on the map, if I am in fact on the map.
Through it all, the main characters were the glue that held things together, of course. And the glue that held Clark together started with his parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, who were played by John Schneider and Annette O'Toole. For Go and Millar, the show wasn't just about puberty with superheroes, but also, as they put it, extreme parenting. And that applies to both Clark's parents and Lex's dad, who is played with mustache-twirling gusto by John Glover.
The Kents in the movie and in the comics always felt like Clark's grandparents versus his parents. So we wanted to make them younger. It was interesting at the time, especially on the WB, and a lot of those shows, the parents were either idiots or non-existent, or had no idea what the kids were up to. And, the one aspect of the show where we did get pushback from the network, and we pushed back, was that, Clark has a good relationship with his parents because they're the only ones who know his secret.
What if Martha Kent and Jonathan Kent were my parents?
Yeah.
Maybe I would have become good, but what if Lionel Luthor was his father? I mean, then you could see him growing up, not serving, for the better good, but he could have become evil and had ulterior motives.
Didn't realize you had a dark side, Clark.
Doesn't everybody?
In one of the most memorable episodes of Smallville's entire run, in what has become a key marker in Clark Kent's life going back to at least as far as the 1978 Superman film, Jonathan died in Season 5's Reckoning, which was also the 100th episode of the series.
Once we got to Season 3, and we were like, okay, I think that we're at least going 5 seasons. that would be the 100th episode.
It was truly a reckoning for the character of Clark Kent, who would no longer have one of the most important people in his life to guide him.
Clark is who he is because of who his parents are. If he had landed in a different cornfield and been picked up by different people, he'd be a different person. The powers were going to come, but who was the person he was going to grow up to be?
217 episodes also means that the writers had plenty of room to explore all kinds of avenues with these characters. Sure, the occasional sloppy storytelling techniques and narrative cul-de-sacs were inevitable. We can overlook Season 4's Go Nowhere, Lana Lang is a Witch thread, or Jimmy Olsen and his brother Jimmy Olsen from Season 8. But the good always outweighed the bad by far.
There's an episode where Lex splits in half, bad Lex, good Lex, and seeing what Lex could really become. And those were always fun to do. I like the Rain from Heaven, the Blood of the Future, those scenes where you see the future of Lex as president, and I love seeing that. I think people got tired. I think of all right, he's good. I really love Lex. He's great, but we gotta hate Lex. Well, the fact that you love him now is going to be a great reason why it's going to be hard to hate him later.
But still, for all the success of the show, the Smallville creative team were always fighting one battle from the unlikeliest of places, within their own studio's ranks. Nowadays, the concept of a multiverse is pretty universally understood among audiences, and the idea of seeing 2 Batmans or 2 Flashes or 100 Lokis on screen at the same time is no big deal. But back when Smallville was being produced, Warner Brothers had a very strict wall between its movie and TV divisions. And Smallville always wound up having to work around the demands of the feature film division as they attempted to get a new Superman movie off the ground.
We were always sort of, oddly having to sort of hold our own against the movie side, which always seemed to be able to dictate certain things.
I think we have integrated a lot of new elements to mythology, but we stayed in the lane of Superman. They had a script by J.J. Abrams in which Krypton didn't explode, which to us is that's not the Superman story. Right. We had to defend ourselves, and they didn't want us to do anything on Krypton because the whole thing was nuts that we were having to defend the actual mythology of Superman against, really pretty aggressive feature executive.
While that J.J. Abrams film never took off, in 2006 the big screen reboot Superman Returns was released to a mixed response. Smallville had just finished its 5th season, where there was in fact a big connection to the film in terms of the iconic Fortress of Solitude.
And we didn't know it at the time. It was a big part of that movie.
Interestingly, the relative failure of Superman Returns, it failed to launch a big screen franchise in the end, proved to be a boon to Smallville.
No disrespect to the filmmakers, but I think Michael is a much better Lex. And I think Tom is a much better Clark and a much better Superman. So I think it just allowed us to keep going and to do what we did. And I think that was definitely a blessing.
Meanwhile, there was a new challenge coming from even closer to home. After the 5th season of Smallville, the WB and UPN merged to form a new network, the CW.
It felt like the stars were aligning against us. You know, the network changed. We had a new head of the network who was, sort of trying to kill us off every which way. But it made us more nimble in terms of stories. We were fighting for our survival always in terms of thinking, okay, we have to really get out there and make the best season ever because this could be our last. Luckily, the audience stuck with us and the show, I think, got stronger, bizarrely in its later years.
10 years is a long time, and key players on the show would drop away a little each season. After 7 years, both Kristen Kreuk and Michael Rosenbaum left Smallville as regular cast members, though they would both return for guest appearances.
I left after season 7, and I felt like Lex was getting there. So I didn't hate the end of my, how my story ended, but you always knew that where he was going.
I missed him for a lot of years, for sure.
Go and Millar also left their creation at the end of the 7th season and never looked back. In fact, they can't even comment on the finale.
We didn't watch the show after we left.
No idea.
That may sound harsh, but the pair don't see it that way at all. Think of it perhaps as Clark finally leaving Smallville for Metropolis.
No, it's because we were, had zero regrets about leaving when we did. We couldn't have been more confident that the show would be in good hands. But after we left, it was like, it was a different show than we would have done. There's no doubt.
Welling, of course, stuck it out until the end as Clark slowly but surely eased into the Superman we all had known was coming over the previous 10 seasons. He even held to the no tights, no flights rule, more or less, until the final moments of the series finale.
I'm very proud at how we finished. I feel like we represented what I wanted to show people, that Clark has taken that leap. He's becoming Superman. He's out there. We know he's out there, but we can't go with him.
Smallville ended on May 13th, 2011, and in the preceding 200-plus episodes it had given us meteor freaks, familiar faces, new canon, and reimagined takes on iconic Superman tropes. But it also gave us something else that we couldn't have imagined at the time, a path forward to a new era of superhero storytelling on the small screen.
Who are you? Don't you know me, Clark? I'm Lex Luthor.
After Smallville left the airwaves, the CW's next superhero show would also prove to be a hit.
That makes sense.
Arrow featured some of the same creative forces who had worked on the previous series.
We had people like Greg Beeman and obviously David Nutter and Glenn Winter, who both went on to create Arrow and then The Flash and brought that sort of visual style to those shows.
Arrow would, in time, launch its own superhero universe on the network, a small screen variation on the Marvel Cinematic Universe that is still going to this day, years after the flagship series ended. It even gave that DC universe its name, the Arrowverse. Not that Welling or Rosenbaum necessarily agree with that choice.
Shouldn't it be called something to do with Smallville?
Smallvilleverse.
Why is it Arrowverse?
Smallverse.
Warner Brothers? Where'd that come from?
They have a point. Go and Millar did try to expand the Smallville universe when they were still running the show. They made an Aquaman pilot starring Justin Hartley that stalled out when the CW took over the old WB regime. In fact, they were in the middle of production when they got the call about the network change.
So all our executives who was hugely supportive of the show are suddenly gone, and we have a new executive who literally says, "We're the Gossip Girl network. I don't want anything to do with superheroes." And so Aquaman, should have been a show that was on the air and was, would have gone, I think, would have been a great companion for Smallville.
The upside is Hartley got that Oliver Queen gig as a result of working with Go and Millar on Aquaman.
That helped create a world where you could have Arrow and you could have Flash and you could have Supergirl and all that stuff. It's just something nice to have been a part of.
By the end of its run, Smallville had truly mined the DC universe in terms of both storylines and characters. So it was a no-brainer that Arrow and those that followed would take things to that next level that Smallville hadn't been allowed, creating an interconnected universe of shows that could explore the DC realm in even more depth, and to greater rating success. From there, as the popularity and hunger for live-action superhero adventures became almost insatiable for both studios and audiences, it was only natural that the characters would spread beyond the CW to other networks and streamers. And yet, the men who created Smallville also think that, ironically enough, their show might not have been able to succeed if it were made in today's environment.
We wouldn't be able to have that freedom that we had. So it was at the beginning of this ride of superheroes and this sort of pop culture phenomenon, and I think was very fortunate and lucky that we were there to have that freedom.
My kids enjoy those shows. It's great that, when you can actually set a template for, things to come. It's more than just a show.
But that, that's not taking anything away from those shows. There's no doubt those wouldn't exist without Smallville as a base. It allowed audiences to see them as more than just genre fare, that they had stories and emotions and depth of character and complexity of story that could intrigue. And I think that really laid the groundwork for what's happened since in terms of the Marvel Universe and the Arrow Universe.
Even the current Superman show on the air, Superman and Lois, owes a big debt to Smallville in that its executive producer Todd Helbing's first freelance writing work was on Smallville's 7th season.
Smallville dug into Clark Kent for the first time in a way that up till then I hadn't really thought about Clark being the actual person. Like, why wouldn't he be? He grew up in a small town in Kansas, and he had these great parents, and they taught him the rights and the wrongs of the world and how to be a great person, and that's what influenced the way he is as a hero.
But I do know that Smallville exists because Alan Miles took liberties to create a version of Smallville that hadn't existed before.
And Smallville was just so earnest in that exploration and so pure. I always call it really pure. It was a pure show.
Which is great. I'm very proud of that. It wasn't done just by me. It was done by a lot of people.
There always will be a place for a show like Smallville.
I used to think it was our families that made us who we are. Then I hoped it was our friends. But that's the thing about memories. You can't forget them.
For everything Superman, Smallville, and superheroes, be sure to keep it locked on IGN.